Welcome back to the next episode of the meta history for Splatoon 3. When we left off, crab meta finally got its infamous nerfs, and we just had the rise of Inkjet. So let's talk about how that took off. Be sure to subscribe if you want to keep up with more episodes of this series, and let's get started. So starting with patch 3.1, the meta wouldn't actually change that much. If you look at like the top weapons in the game, ballpoint and Inkjet just kind of joined the best weapons in the game, but it was very quickly apparent that ballpoint was the best weapon in the game. Fizzy and Inkjet ended up being the most broken kit we've had so far. While crab was still strong even after the nerfs it had, Jetpack was incredibly good at countering it, and with such a large hitbox, the kills with it were basically free. Not only that, but between 190p, Old Fizzy, and ballpoint short-range painting mode, ballpoint could get plenty of them. In fact, it got so bad that ballpoint very quickly became a weapon that could be stacked 2 of in tournaments, with Splatoon Stamper being really the only main meta threat that could stand up to Inkjet's dominance, as everything else really struggled to deal with it at this time. Ballpoint as a main weapon was still pretty cool for the meta though. I think most people have enjoyed ballpoint as a weapon since its matchups aren't too harsh and it feels pretty interactive as a weapon you can fight. Even 2 of them isn't too oppressive, and it mostly came from how overtuned Inkjet was. And I think it's very easy to look back on this weapon because with ballpoint and splash both being prominent right now, it was pretty easy to build team comps, and the specials they had, while overtuned in Jetpack's case, both allowed for a lot of variable and interesting counterplay. If you want to learn more about this era, I did a whole video on why Splash and Ballpoint were such perfect meta weapons that you can check out in the description. Ballpoint wasn't the only Jetpack weapon used though. While it was a bit rare, Rapid Deco was only 200 at the time, and it did see some prominent tournament results as well. Another weapon we saw a little bit more of though was Neo Splash. I still hold that I don't think this weapon was as strong as people gave it credit for, and it never really took off to an insane extent. However, it was very good at spamming Tri-Strike, which was still rather freshly buffed. This could potentially displace Inkjet a little bit and be good at camping the landings from Inkjet and Zipcaster, but we still never really saw too much of this. I would say the meta still definitely felt a little bit different. I mean, having 1 or 2 Inkjets are definitely going to change things a little bit, but at the end of the day, this ended up being a slightly remixed version of crab meta, and competition for it was still limited with how bad the entry tools were this early into the game. And that's where patch 4.0 comes along. This was the update that introduced S-Blast and Paintbrush to the game, and had some notable kit inclusions of Rapid Blaster Pro Deco, Custom Dually Squelcher, Tennis Umbrella, and the dreaded Splatana Wiper Deco. This was the first missile weapon to be added to the game, and seemed like it would originally be way better than the other ones. There were a lot of harsh reactions to this, but some people like Arashi and FLC ended up correctly guessing that the missile spammability nerf would end up checking this weapon before it even came out. Anyway, the patch ended up being pretty significant. Let's start with the nerfs. Splash-O-Matic would get just a small little tone back. Paint's a little bit less further away, makes it a bit easier to fight the weapon. That's a good change. They're clearly being careful not to over-nerf things. Anyway, after that, they took away 5 frames from Machine and basically shot it. Machine is dead. So Machine kind of died here, kind of. People still picked it for a while, like it didn't drop off immediately. But from here on out, the more time passes, the more people realize that this weapon was just cooked. This is pretty much the only over-nerf of a weapon Splatoon 3 has ever done. The devs just really had enough of Machine's reputation. This was the weapon that's been good in Splatoon 3 the longest, being notable even before crab meta started rising, and it's clear here that the devs had enough. It's hard to understate the damage this did, but if anything, I'd say that this nerf was key in making sure crab meta was well and truly dead, as the Splash and Machine synergy was nowhere near as strong as it used to be and would never fully recover. And just for some good measure, Splatoon Stamper would get some nerfs here. Finally being established as a relatively strong weapon, it got a little bit less wide of a horizontal hitbox, and more importantly, a 30% ink consumption increase. People at the time thought this might have been overkill, but turns out Stamper would need a few more nerfs later down the line. This weapon really was just that good. Stamper was never really super dependent on crab meta to thrive, but after this nerf and before its eventual Zipcaster buff is definitely the weakest point this weapon ever had, though it never got that far down. Rapid Blaster Deco, for some reason, and Ballpoint Spiraling would both also get plus 10 points for special, along with Neo Splash. Like I said, these nerfs were basically the real end to crab meta. But besides those, there were a few other buffs that really made Inkjet meta its own thing. First up was the buffs to pencil. Getting better ink consumption and a movement speed increase, this would set the foundation for pencil to enter the meta as a strong weapon. But to make sure it and other cooler weapons got there was the Tacticooler buff. Up until now, it's gotten some decent buffs, but this is what pushed the special over the edge to become a meta pick. Lasting 2 seconds longer and stacking better with special power-up, this now gave it the duration it needed to really start Tacticooler in the meta. Oh, and Jump and Bubble also got some pretty decent buffs. None of these are that notable, and they nerfed Stamp's duration, which is really funny. As of recording this, on the 12th of February 2025, they have not buffed the special since. Okay, that's a lot of changes. What ended up happening? Well, within like the first week after these changes, people very quickly realized just how broken the combination of ballpoint and zap was. Zap at this time, remember, is 180 points for special, with a Tacticooler with only a 7.5 second cooldown. And that means zap could very easily cooler cycle. What this means is that zap could paint, get its cooler, paint for its next cooler, and get the next cooler before the previous one ran out, which means even if you were able to punish and take out the zap, they would just come back and rebuff themselves over and over. Short range weapons nowadays have a big risk factor with cooler because they might die before they get their next one. But back then, that just wasn't a major factor. It was incredibly easy to keep the cooler cycle going. And ballpoint also just benefited from its competition being nerfed. 10 points for special higher was just much less nerfs, which meant that if anything, it looked even stronger now than it was prior, with double ballpoint definitely being something that you could still run. During this time, a lot of other newer weapons would rise up into the ranks. For example, Nautilus was picked a bit since there was a lack of crab and burst bomb slowing the weapon down. However, possibly the most notable one is the rise of Slosher. This weapon had been held back by machines stealing all of the spotlight, but the second it went away, it was incredibly clear just how powerful the main weapon was with its newly buffed Tri-Strike. Another weapon that was quickly seeing more use is Squeezer. While Nautilus was good, Squeezer was better. Being an incredibly powerful main weapon, amazing at taking fights, and in this meta particularly thrived at being really good at both pairing with ballpoint as well as being able to shut down Inkjets, since it had a large amount of range and wall to be able to tank for damage. We even saw a little bit of Anarchy Splattershot Nova on maps like Mahi Splat Zones for double Inkjet, since Nova's high jetpack spam ability was pretty useful right now. In the background though, Pencil was also being tried as this kind of niche pick, like we saw it on Mincemeat and Brine where the 5 shots could cap the zone. That's some interesting success, but by no means actually meta. And with all of those developments, it didn't take long until 4.1 happened, where NZAP was finally buffed. Yeah, they just made it better. Like, there's no trade-off or anything. It didn't get its points for special nerfed. Try got its points for special nerfed. That's because it was good in Turf War. So they nerfed it because of that. But Zap just got stronger. So that's funny. Tacticooler would end up being fine. Inkjet, on the other hand, got a nerf pretty fast. Yeah, compared to Crab meta, it just took 2 patches here. Inkjet's 50 damage blast radius was reduced by approximately 15%, which for the most part would slowly start to end ballpoint in the meta. Like with Machine after its nerfs, people would still use it as it was known to be a powerful weapon, but this is where it started to drop off, and it was only further accelerated by a rise of a certain infamous weapon. I would hide the fact that it's Pencil here, but everybody knows it's Pencil getting better at the same time. However, the Jet nerfs at the end of this patch would not be what it's known for, because this patch also had some interesting special buffs. Super Chump became a lot more usable by getting better damage. Ink Vacuum got a massive explosion radius increase, which would get people messing with vanilla Jet Sculpture. We'll get to that next time. But most importantly, with the end of one giant 2-shot blast radius special, another one would immediately replace it. Trizuka has had its outside damage radius, one of the largest blast radius in the game, increased from 40 to 60. And now, this infamously janky Zuka hitbox would rise up and start a whole new era of the game. But we'll have to get into that next time. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all later.